Under the frozen glow of the gas giant above, the orbital colony of Trelith 7 trembled beneath the arrival of ships that did not belong to this system. Their hulls glistened obsidian black against the starlight, the alien fleet moving with the easy confidence of predators who had never once been challenged. Inside the command vessel, Admiral Varric lounged in his throne-like seat, one leg crossed over the other, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of military dominance. "Another primitive outpost," he muttered, almost to himself, as the holographic display highlighted the orbital defenses of Trelith 7, a few rail cannons, an aging defense satellite network, nothing resembling a real military threat. They have engines that still burn chemical fuel. Barely worth the munitions. His bridge officers laughed, a low, reverberating sound in the vaulted chamber. Varric allowed himself a thin smile. It was always the same. The locals shouted, fired their laughable weapons, perhaps even scored a lucky hit before the Empire burned their homes to drifting ash. There was no art to it anymore, no challenge. But tonight, if he had cared to look, he might have noticed the faint tremor in his own hands, the one he always ignored before battles. He told himself it was anticipation. Far below, in the colony's maintenance bay, a young woman sat cross-legged on a metal crate, a battered textbook propped open beside a flickering portable lamp. The power had been unreliable since the evacuation order, but she had exams next week, and no alien invasion was going to change that. Her name was Mara Kellen, 19, apprentice mechanic, too thin for her oversized coveralls and currently chewing the end of her stylus while trying to memorize thrust vector equations. Around her, the bay buzzed with frantic engineers preparing drones for what everyone knew would be a hopeless defense. Mara wasn't supposed to be here. Students were told to evacuate, but the evac ships were packed, and she refused to leave her mother behind. Besides, she liked machines better than people. Machines didn't panic when things went wrong. She was halfway through another equation when the first impact shook the bay. Dust rained from the ceiling. Somewhere overhead, metal screamed as something massive broke apart in orbit. Mara sighed, marked her place in the textbook, and glanced toward the main screen as it flickered to life. The image was grainy, distorted by jamming signals, but clear enough. Alien warships descending through the upper atmosphere, energy weapons cutting apart the colony's meager defenses. The rail cannons spat white-hot projectiles, but most missed entirely. The few that hit splashed harmlessly against shimmering alien shields. "They're toying with us," muttered Chief Engineer Bran, a big man with grease permanently embedded in the lines of his face. "Like cats with vermin." Mara didn't reply. She was watching something odd on the feed, an orbital defense satellite that hadn't moved in years, one she'd always assumed was offline, suddenly spinning to face the lead alien cruiser. Then it fired. No build-up, no visible charge, no warning at all. Just a single, silent flash, and the alien cruiser split neatly in half, both sections venting fire and debris as they tumbled planetward. The bay went silent. "What in the hell was that?" Bran whispered. More flashes. More alien ships dying before anyone could even process what was happening. The feed went white, then dark, then came back with half the enemy fleet burning. Mara felt a chill run the length of her spine. That satellite had been there for as long as she could remember. Rusting. Dormant. A relic from some forgotten war. Nobody had ever mentioned it could do that. On the alien command ship, Admiral Varric stared in disbelief as his fleet, was annihilated in seconds. No warnings. No energy readings before the strikes. Just instant, surgical destruction. "What weapon was that?" he demanded. No one answered. His bridge crew scrambled over consoles, searching for signals, power sources, anything. There was nothing. Varric felt something he hadn't in decades. Uncertainty. He crushed it instantly. This was an outpost. Primitive farmers and miners. They'd gotten lucky, or unearthed some leftover weapon from a forgotten era. Nothing more. "Send in the second wave," he ordered coldly. "Burn the colony. I want survivors for questioning." Back on Trelith 7, evacuation klaxons wailed. Civilians poured through the streets, desperate to reach the few remaining transports. Above them, human defense drones, old, barely functional things, took to the air like a swarm of angry insects. Mara was supposed to be on one of those transports. She didn't move. The maintenance base shook again as Brand shouted orders to load the drones with live ammunition. "If we're dying tonight," he roared over the noise, "we're taking some of them with us." Mara slid off her crate, slammed her textbook shut, and grabbed a toolkit. "That wiring on Bay 3's drones is still fried," she said. "They won't fly unless someone rewires the flight cores." Brand blinked at her. "Kid, you should be on the evac ship." "Yeah, well," Mara muttered, already heading for Bay 3. "So should you." Her hands shook as she worked. Above the colony, more alien ships descended, cautious now but still confident in their numbers. They thought this was just cleanup after an unexpected setback. Mara caught snatches of panicked radio chatter from pilots and officers, the static-laced voices of people who already knew they were outmatched. But under that panic, beneath the chaos, she kept hearing one phrase repeated by the defense controllers in calm, clipped tones. "Project Hades confirmed active. Proceed to Phase 2. Mara had no idea what Phase 2 was. The aliens didn't either. In orbit, Admiral Varric watched as a second wave engaged the colony's defenses and died even faster than the first. Precision railgun strikes from hidden platforms gutted entire squadrons. Drones he hadn't seen before, sleek, angular things without any visible pilots, slipped through a ship's shields like they weren't even there, planting charges before vanishing into the void. It wasn't luck. It wasn't old technology unearthed from some forgotten war. It was a trap. For the first time in his career, Varric felt the thin edge of fear. On the ground, Mara finished rewiring the last drone just as a blinding white flash split the sky above. One of the alien carriers was falling, burning as it tore through the atmosphere, the impossible weapon from orbit carving through its hull like it was paper. The drone beside her powered up, systems humming to life. A calm synthetic voice spoke through its vocoder. Mission parameters uploaded. Civilian casualties, irrelevant. Enemy annihilation, priority. Mara froze, staring at the machine. Something in its tone, flat, emotionless, inevitable, told her this had all been planned long before tonight. The drone lifted off, joining dozens more streaking into the darkened sky. Mara stood there, toolkit in hand, as the alien fleet began to die in earnest. Far above, Admiral Varric's smirk finally faded. Something had gone very, very wrong. And in the pit of his stomach, he realized he might have just provoked a species that had been waiting for this moment all along. The war for the galaxy had just begun. The colony sky was still burning when the first message reached Admiral Varric's flagship. His officers whispered over their consoles, voices tight with disbelief as ship after ship fell silent across the comms grid. Not destroyed, not damaged, gone. Vaporized or torn apart by weapons no one could detect until the moment they struck. Varric stared at the tactical display, jaw set. He had expected a brief engagement, another primitive rebellion crushed beneath the Empire's fleet. Instead, entire squadrons were vanishing before they could even fire. The screens flickered with impact telemetry he didn't understand, railgun slugs moving at fractions of light speed, autonomous drones with no detectable drive signatures, orbital artillery firing from silos no one had known existed. It wasn't chaos. It was strategy. And that realization chilled him more than the weapons themselves. On Trellith 7, Mara Kellen stood in the smoking ruins of the maintenance bay, watching the sky crackle with silent explosions. The drones she'd repaired had joined the swarm, now sweeping upward through the atmosphere like a metallic storm. Their precision was terrifying. They moved in perfect coordination, no wasted motion, carving through the alien air cover before it could even regroup. Mara didn't know if there were pilots somewhere or if the machines flew themselves, but they fought with a kind of efficiency that left no room for heroism or glory. She tried to feel relief that the invaders were dying. She couldn't. Something about the calm, methodical slaughter unsettled her. It felt less like a defense and more like a curtain lifting on a war humanity had been rehearsing for decades. Chief Engineer Bran limped over, one arm burned from the earlier blast, eyes bloodshot from smoke. Evac transports got through, he rasped. Most civilians off-world now. Mara nodded, but didn't move. Her hands were streaked with grease and blood she wasn't sure was hers. She wanted to ask him about the phrase she kept hearing over comms, Project Hades, but Bran was already shouting orders to another crewman. Above the colony, the battle shifted. The surviving alien cruisers fell back into high orbit, their formations ragged, engines flickering. Varric barked commands to regroup, but his captains were panicking now, their voices cracking over the fleet channel. They had never faced an enemy like this. The Empire's campaigns were usually one-sided slaughters, efficient, predictable, inevitable. But this was surgical annihilation delivered with the dispassionate precision of a predator that had studied its prey too long. Varric forced the fear from his voice. Pull back to the outer ring. Form defensive screens. We will find the source of those weapons and destroy it. His crew obeyed, but none spoke. They had all seen the same thing. The enemy didn't miss. Across the fleet, officers reviewed intercepted transmissions from Earth and the colonies. They expected panic, surrender please, confusion. Instead, they found calm, coded orders relayed in tight military bursts. No one screamed. No one begged for rescue. Humanity moved with the discipline of a fleet that had trained for this moment in secret, waiting for someone arrogant enough to provoke it. In the Empire's War Council chambers half a galaxy away, the first reports triggered uproar. Some admirals demanded immediate reinforcements. Others accused Varric of incompetence. A minority, smaller but louder with each passing hour, warned that the humans were not what they seemed. They hid their strength, one counselor said, voice shaking. Perhaps for centuries. They let us think they were weak. Impossible, another snapped. They have no empire, no central fleet. Half their technology is centuries behind ours. Then explain the losses, the first counselor shot back. Explain how an uncharted backwater is dismantling the Third Imperial Armada. No one could. On Trellith, 7, Mara followed Bran into the command shelter carved beneath the colony's surface. Holographic displays lit the room in cold blue light. Officers moved between consoles with grim focus, directing drones, rail batteries, kinetic mines hidden in the asteroid belt, all of it part of some vast network only now revealing itself. Mara stopped when she saw the largest display. It showed the entire system, the alien fleet in retreat, human forces advancing with mechanical precision, supply lines already severed by strikes on orbital depots the aliens hadn't even finished building. Was this all waiting? She asked softly. One officer glanced at her, but didn't answer. She turned to Bran. They knew this was coming. Bran's face was gray with exhaustion. Maybe not when, but they built for it. He nodded at the display, where another alien cruiser winked out under a railgun strike from somewhere beyond the moon's orbit. You don't hide weapons like these unless you expect to need them. Mara thought of the drone's flat mechanical voice declaring civilian casualties irrelevant. She wondered what kind of people prepared for war like this in secret, smiling for the cameras while burying superweapons in the dark. In orbit, Varric stood over his command table, staring at casualty projections climbing higher by the minute. One of his captains appeared on the hololink, eyes wide with the brittle edge of fear. Admiral, we must withdraw. Regroup with the Second Fleet before these things cut us off entirely. Varric didn't answer immediately. He watched another cluster of his ships vanish from the tactical display. The enemy never pursued recklessly, never revealed where the next strike would come from. They simply dismantled his fleet piece by piece, like engineers disassembling a broken machine. At last he spoke, voice low. No. We hold. The Empire does not flee from insects. But even as he said it, he remembered the human wars he had studied in military academy, wars fought with firebombs, gas, nuclear storms that burned cities from the maps of their own world. He had admired their brutality once. Now he wondered if the humans had simply turned that brutality outward, waiting for someone like him to wake it. On the colony surface, Mara watched the alien fleet pull farther back toward the system's edge. The human officers barely reacted. They were already redeploying drones, shifting rail platforms, sealing the trap tighter. She realized then that the aliens hadn't attacked humanity at all. They had attacked fate. And whatever humanity truly was, whatever it had been building in silence all these years, was only beginning to wake up. The retreating alien fleet reached the far edge of the system, engines burning hard, hulls scorched from weapons they still could not name. Admiral Varric stood rigid on his command deck, every muscle tight, as he watched the tactical displays flicker with losses. His fleet, ships that had crushed rebellions across a dozen sectors, was now a splintered remnant hiding behind its own defensive screens. The Empire had never known defeat like this, not in living memory. Yet the humans did not pursue in fury or vengeance. They moved with the same cold precision as before, advancing fleets through wormholes that should not have existed, intercepting supply convoys hours before they were due to arrive, targeting shipyards and fuel depots the Empire had believed were secret. Varric's surviving officers whispered about betrayal, about spies, about impossible intelligence work, but none could explain how the humans seemed to know exactly where every Imperial asset lay. On Trellith, 7. The command center buzzed with low voices and the constant hum of machinery. Mara stood among officers far above her rank, her grease-stained coveralls out of place beside polished uniforms, but no one sent her away. Too many technicians had died in the early bombardments. Any steady hands were welcome now. She moved from console to console, patching circuits, stabilizing power relays, keeping the vast network of defense drones online. Between tasks, she watched the war unfold on the main display. The human fleet struck without warning, vanishing into wormholes that snapped open like slits in reality, reappearing hours later across the system with fresh kills to their name. Entire enemy formations disappeared in minutes. Mara found herself gripping the edge of the console harder each time, knuckles white because it no longer felt like defense. It felt like extermination. Admiral Varric saw it too. Every time he tried to regroup, human forces anticipated the move, cutting off retreat corridors, ambushing stragglers, hammering field depots before his ships could resupply. He requested reinforcements from the Empire's core worlds, but even as he waited, he knew they would arrive too late. His armada was being unmade now, not next week. For the first time in his career, Varric wondered if the Empire itself might be vulnerable. The thought chilled him more than the weapons tearing through his ships. On the colony, Mara overheard officers discussing new orders from Earth Command. Phase 3 was beginning, though no one explained what that meant. She heard coordinates, outer system shipyards, asteroid mining stations long thought abandoned, now revealed as staging grounds for human fleets rising from hiding like sharks from dark water. One of the officers, a hard-eyed woman with silver hair, caught Mara listening. "You should get some rest," the woman said, voice flat. Mara shook her head. "I can keep the drone relay stable." The officer studied her a moment before nodding. "Then remember this. We didn't start this war, but it ends here." The words stayed with Mara as she returned to her console. She didn't know if they were meant to be comforting. In orbit, Varric's surviving captains argued over comms. Some demanded retreat beyond the system entirely. Others insisted reinforcements would arrive soon, that this was only a temporary reversal. But Varric heard the tremor in their voices. The same tremor he felt in his own hands. He ordered a defensive perimeter around the largest carrier, gathering what ships he had left into a single formation. If the humans wanted to end this, they would have to come through everything he had. They came. Not with reckless charges or overwhelming numbers, but with the same terrifying precision as before. Wormholes bloomed across the darkness, spilling human cruisers and drone swarms into the perimeter before the Imperial ships could react. Kinetic strikes slammed through shields like they weren't there. Automated weapons platforms, towed silently into position hours earlier, revealed themselves in blinding flashes of tungsten fire. Mara watched from the colony display as the alien perimeter collapsed piece by piece. The human fleet moved like a blade through water, every cut planned, every strike landing exactly where it needed to. She told herself she should feel triumph, relief, something. Instead, she felt only the weight of what she was seeing. This wasn't desperation. This wasn't survival. This was a species revealing its teeth after centuries of pretending it had none. Admiral Varric stared at the holomap as his carrier's escorts vanished one by one. Static filled the comms from half his captains. The rest were simply gone, ships reduced to expanding clouds of metal and flame. He realized then that reinforcements would never matter. Not against an enemy who fought like this. Not against humans who struck without anger, without hesitation, without mercy or celebration. For a moment, watching the last line of his perimeter shatter, Varric almost ordered surrender. The word hovered on his tongue like poison. But before he could speak, his flagship shuddered under a kinetic impact that tore through 3 decks at once. Alarms howled. Atmosphere vented into space. Officers screamed over failing systems. Varric gripped the edge of his command table, forcing himself upright through the chaos, refusing to fall while his fleet died around him. On Trellith 7, Mara saw the enemy flagship drifting, its engines dark, its escorts gone. Human fleets were already advancing past it toward the outer system, striking at Imperial supply lines with machine-like efficiency. The command center erupted in restrained cheers, but Mara didn't join them. She kept watching the flagship, imagining the man aboard it, the one who had brought war to her colony and now stared at the ruins of everything he commanded. Somehow she knew this wasn't the end. It was only the moment the Empire finally began to understand what it had awakened. The wreck of the Imperial flagship drifted among the stars, its once proud hull torn open like a gutted animal. Fires burned in compartments with no air to carry the heat, faint orange glimmers against the endless black. Admiral Varric stood on what remained of his command deck, the emergency lighting casting long shadows across his face. He no longer barked orders. There were none left to give. Most of his fleet was gone, the survivors scattering to deep space with broken engines and shattered discipline. Reinforcements would arrive too late to save anything worth saving. Across the system, the human fleets tightened their net. Wormhole gates bloomed silently in the dark, each one disgorging more ships, more drones, more cold inevitability. There was no triumphant music, no sweeping speeches. Humanity advanced like a rising tide, each movement deliberate, controlled, merciless in its precision. They offered no taunts, no demands for surrender, only the steady dismantling of everything the Empire had believed unshakable. On Trellith 7, Mara Kellen leaned against the rail of the colony's command center, eyes burning from sleepless hours. She had watched the war unfold piece by piece on the great holographic display, had seen fleets die and empires fracture while she tightened coolant lines and replaced blown circuit boards. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped feeling like a bystander. It was impossible to stand this close to history and not feel its weight settling on her shoulders. She thought of the textbook still lying in the maintenance bay where she'd left it, equations half-solved beneath the flickering light. That life, classes, exams, the quiet dream of fixing engines for merchant ships, already felt like someone else's story. A low murmur passed through the command center as new data scrolled across the main screen. Human fleets had bypassed the wrecked Imperial flagship, surging outward toward the Empire's border colonies. Not to destroy them, the officers explained in clipped voices, but to seize them intact. Every comm relay, every shipyard, every garrison cut off before the Empire's core worlds even understood what was happening. The war was no longer defense. It was conquest carried out with the same calm efficiency as everything else humanity had done since this began. Admiral Varric finally opened a channel. His voice was hoarse, stripped of its earlier arrogance. "This war is over," he said to the human command frequencies. "You've made your point. What are your terms?" For a long moment there was only static. Then a human voice, calm, measured, almost disinterested, replied, "Unconditional cessation of hostilities. All remaining Imperial forces will stand down. No further resistance will be tolerated." Varric waited for threats, for the usual promises of revenge or demands for humiliation that came with surrender. None came. Is that all? He asked bitterly. Yes, the voice said. Stand down and live. Resist and be erased. The choice is yours. The channel closed. Varric stared at the ruined decks around him, at the dead officers sprawled where explosions had thrown them. He thought of the Empire's core worlds, fat and arrogant and unprepared, still imagining themselves rulers of a tame galaxy. He thought of the humans, silent, patient, hiding claws for centuries until someone gave them reason to bear them. Slowly, he gave the only order left to him. Across the system, Imperial ships powered down weapons. Engines fell silent. Surviving crews transmitted surrender codes with shaking hands. The war ended not with a final battle, but with the quiet collapse of everything the Empire had believed about itself. Mara watched it happen from the colony command center. Officers around her exhaled in relief, some sinking into chairs, others staring at the displays like they didn't trust what they were seeing. Cheers broke out in the streets outside as news spread through the civilian channels. The aliens were beaten. Humanity had won. But Mara didn't cheer. She remembered the drones speaking in flat, mechanical voices about enemy annihilation and acceptable losses. She remembered the precision of the railguns, the silence of the wormhole fleets, the cold tone of the human negotiator demanding surrender, without rage or triumph. This hadn't felt like a desperate defense. It had felt like a predator finally given permission to hunt. Hours later, she stood on the observation deck overlooking the landing field as the first alien prisoners were brought planetside. Admiral Varric walked at the center of the column, shoulders straight despite exhaustion and defeat. For a moment his gaze met hers through the glass. There was no hatred there, only the look of a man who had glimpsed something vast and dangerous stirring in the dark and knew his people had awakened it too late. He was escorted to a waiting transport under heavy guard. Not to a prison, Mara overheard, but to a diplomatic vessel. The humans wanted him alive. They were already speaking of treaties, of new borders, of alliances built atop the bones of the old order. As the transport lifted away, Mara realized the galaxy she had grown up in was gone. Humanity had stepped into the center of it now, not as victims or survivors, but as something larger and far more dangerous. That night, she returned to the maintenance bay. Her textbook still lay on the crate where she had left it, pages smudged with grease and ash. The little flashlight beside it flickered weakly when she switched it on. For a long time, she stared at the equations she'd been solving when the sky first burned. She tried to imagine picking up where she had left off, pretending life could ever be small again. Outside, fleets moved through wormholes toward the Empire's heart. New governments were rising in the shadow of old ones. The war was over, but nothing about the quiet streets or the clear night sky felt like peace. Mara closed the textbook and shut off the light. Humanity had won, but as she stood there in the empty bay, she wondered what exactly had been unleashed and whether the galaxy would ever be ready for it.